Hello, I'm Hannah, and this is Hannah's Books. So, I just finished the second book of Tolstoy's War and Peace, which many of you are reading along with me. And today I want to talk just a little about what is happening in this section, what I think it accomplishes, how it differs from Book 1, and what questions I have that I'd love to hear your thoughts about. There are a few things I'm not sure about. I would also love to hear how your own reading is going, and if you have any other insights of your own to add, please chime in down in the comments. My apologies for being completely missing in action in my comments lately. I am hoping that I'll be able to do a better job this week. Last week in Book 1, we saw a variety of parties and family gatherings, in other words, celebrations of peace. What was fascinating to me is how much more war there was in those scenes. There were not only moments of great tension and anger, but a lot of talk of tactics and strategy, even attacks, words we often apply to military situations instead of social ones. And now, here in Chapter 2, where the plot turns away from the drawing room and moves to the battlefield, we see the opposite. The petty posturing is almost identical. Yu Lee points this out in the really interesting comments she and other readers make in the book Tolstoy Together. As she writes, "The army is just another soiree, and everyone is expected to stay predictable." Last week, or possibly in my introductory video about this read-along, someone asked in the comments how common we thought it was for people to abandon the book during Anna's party at the beginning of Book 1. Although personally I was charmed by that section, I do completely get the point that it is not necessarily a place where we fall in love with particular main characters or immediately get sucked up in an exciting plot. For those of us who do enjoy that kind of story, though, perhaps those of us who love Jane Austen, for example, we might find Book 2 to be much more of a struggle to get through. Don't get me wrong, battles are not the only thing going on. We get at least the beginning of what I suspect will be a book full of big ideas, and we also get some real analysis of the growth of particular characters. Despite the fact that I don't really want to read about battles, there's something about the realities of war that raise the stakes on how characters act, and that kept me completely committed to this reading experience. I want to go back to Yu Lee for a moment. Here's what she says. "When people say you can skip the war parts of War and Peace and read the peace parts only, they may be saying, let's pretend we could skip this pandemic, or any catastrophe, uncertainty, or inconvenience, and make the world go on as we want it to." Indeed. Okay, so in general, we get the story of Andrei Volokhonsky and Nikolai Rostov after they've joined the war. We get to learn a lot more about how they see the world as we go through this chapter, but we also get to see a larger picture of Russia, one that tries at least a bit to show the hierarchy of class and power in the army, and in society too at large, I guess. We see the people at the top of the Russo-Austrian alliance against Napoleon all the way down to the common soldiers. Of course, what we barely see are serfs and servants. With almost no exception, these people are neither named nor given voices. But there are these flashes where we see a moment of insight into the lives of footmen or other personal employees. I'm actually thinking of a scene in the first book about the hired musicians who were exhausted, but we see similar moments in Book 2 as well. So in addition to class issues, I think another one of those big ideas Tolstoy is playing with here is the idea of honor. An aside here for a moment. For those of you who don't know, I trained as an historian, and one of my primary interests was the history of the U.S. South. While my own work focused on ideas about race, gender, and disability, one of the things history graduate students do is learn about historiography. That is, the history of how historians have written about the past. One of the most fascinating classroom discussions I ever had was about notions of Southern honor, an argument that usually suggested that, at least in the case of white men of power, they were often extremely concerned with how other people saw them and treated them. Any critique by an other might be taken as an insult to one's personal honor. Of course, that's a theme that Tolstoy is exploring here in several different characters. I'll just talk about two biggies we've already met from Chapter 1, Rostov and Volokhonsky. In Nikolai Rostov's case, he gets in a scrape that puts his personal honor in conflict with the idea of regimental honor. In a moment when he's angry that someone insults him, he insults his superior, his colonel. Even after he realizes that he behaved in a way that he knows was inappropriate, he won't apologize or really back down at all. That tension between personal and group honor only gets resolved by the stunning things that war makes soldiers face. When death seems like a real possibility, Nikolai cares more about being loved, about being in community, than he does about personal honor. The other honor story I want to talk about is one I'm less sure I'm interpreting correctly. Perhaps it'll become clearer to me as I continue to read, or perhaps I'll realize I was following my own obsessions a bit too far while I was reading. I'm thinking here of Andrei. He wants so much to be seen as a commander, one who has real authority. He wants people to respect that authority. And by respect here, I mean treat him as if he should not be challenged. When he watches Prince Bagration, or whatever his name is, he realizes that not everyone leads in exactly the way he wants to. Bagratión's leadership is a lot more hands-off. And what I think we're seeing in this scene is the way his relaxed leadership has some advantages and some disadvantages. And then Andrei sees a character, Captain Tushin, do what the text portrays as a heroic act at a moment when it isn't observed by anyone else. When the general attacks that heroic soldier, Andrei explains Tushin's actions, trying to explain that Bagration should acknowledge that Tushin was a hero deserving of honor. The general doesn't buy it. And at the end of the encounter, Andrei goes away depressed. As my spouse David and I discussed yesterday, as we enjoyed eating the excellent poppy seed hamantaschen that David made, cookies to celebrate the Jewish holiday of Purim, we didn't really know exactly why Andrei was depressed. David has read ahead of me and alluded to the fact that my opinion might change as I go along. But from my current place in the book, it seems to me that he's upset for two big reasons. Partly, the general doesn't believe Andrei, and perhaps he sees that as an insult to his personal honor. The second part, though, is more interesting, I think. I think Andrei realizes that even when one acts like a hero, as Tushin did, one isn't necessarily recognized for it. Honor doesn't necessarily follow just because someone has done something honorable. Does that make sense? I can imagine that if some person who saw themselves as entitled to a powerful position suddenly saw that one's place in society is not based on what they deserve in any real way, and that could be devastating, shaking their worldview. I must admit that due to some other commitments, my reading was fairly quick, and I didn't spend the time to go through other translations, which might have opened up the text a bit more. So I would love to hear your thoughts about this question specifically. Why do you think Andrei was depressed? Well, I am really looking forward to reading the third book for next week. And the third book is the last one in Volume 1. Thank you all for joining me today. And special thanks to those of you who are reading along with me. I hope you will be back for this continuing discussion of War and Peace next Monday. I'll be back before that with a totally different bookish video too. See you soon here on Hannah's Books.